Across the entire existence of this game, various variations of the German guild have been extremely dominant in the European metagame. Especially in the most recent versions of the game, the German guild just seems insane. Following the Bismarck side quest, whereafter a fully united Germany guild emerged, there have been two incredibly harsh nerfs to the German playstyle. First, after the Versailles patch, the German guild lost a lot of territory. But still, they somehow managed to threaten the European meta to such a point, even the usually isolationist American players intervened to restore balance. After this embarrassment, the Yalta patch would completely cut Germany in two. But despite this, the West German guild would again rise to become the most powerful state in Western Europe. And if this wasn't enough, the Better Dead Than Red patch would remove the East German guild again, making the German guild even more dominant in the European meta. But is this view on the Germany build warranted, or does the German success only really begin in the modern metas? The first documented German playstyle originated in the ancient meta, where they, unsurprisingly, had to contend with the absolute behemoth playstyle of Rome. To keep themselves alive, the most successful Germanic guilds got a special ability, Limes Germanicus, and with this ability, the German guilds on the Roman side of the Rhine would serve for the Roman military, defending the Roman borders. Through this system, the Germanic guilds would also come into contact and integrate into Roman culture. Learning from the Roman playstyles would become very crucial to the Germans later on. The Germanic players, famed for their impressive military skill, would come to occupy many key roles within the Roman guild. The Roman players became increasingly lax in military matters, partially due to their reliance on the German guilds, which put the German players in a perfect position for the Hunnic Invasion DLC. Hun players were leaving the Central Asian server and invading the European one, causing ever more Germanic players to flee to the borders of the Roman guild, who were unable to stop such an invasion. Germanic players would start to break off territory from the Romans, the most adventurous of which, the Vandals, would manage to reach all the way to Rome, devastating the city. After this Fall of Civilizations patch, the Roman playstyle would finally be nerfed, giving great opportunity for our German players going forwards. But to recap, how good was this first generation of Germanic players? They had a high military stat and were quite decent at diplomacy as well. They did heavily lack administration and economy though, being mostly tribal societies and all. As such, their innovation too was rather low. Their tribal nature also hindered their ability to work as a cohesive unit, often fighting amongst each other as well. So their stability stat is relatively low. Still, their military stat is undeniable, and while the German tribes were by no means overpowered, they still land themselves a solid place at B tier. But with the Roman meta gone, the German playstyle evolved. As several Germanic guilds were set up, the new German kingdoms developed the special skill Camouflage. You see, the Roman guild wasn't gone, it had simply refocused on a different biome in Eastern Europe. So, to adapt to the new reality, several German guilds kept pretending that they were part of the Roman guild, ruling with official approval from the Eastern Roman guild leaders while adopting Roman traditions and institutions. But they also brought a great innovation to the European server, their interpretation of the nobility class. Most players and classes became subservient to this noble class, who would fight amongst themselves for power within the guild. The most powerful would be named King, and this dynastic playstyle would remain the meta in Europe for over a millennia. Sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with the 2 videos I release every single week, consider doing so. Thank you. The absolute dominant German playstyle of the era was that of the Franks. That's right, French players, I've said it. The Carolingian Frankish Empire was Germanic, not French. Under the leadership of successive good leaders, the Franks built up a massive empire in Western Europe. But under the leadership of Charlemagne, perhaps their greatest guild leader, they would completely shake up the meta. First off, the noble class would become even more dominant in the post-Charlemagne meta, with European guilds increasingly subdivided into smaller guilds, with their own individual rulers. This would be the defining skill of the Frankish guild, known as feudalism. But the other defining skill of the Germanic guild, Camouflage, would be upgraded by the Franks, now becoming Imposter. Patch after patch, the remaining Roman guild had become less and less relevant, And without the Romans as a meta-defining threat, pretending to still be a part of the Roman Guild became increasingly less important. Due to an alliance with the Papal Guild, an immensely powerful diplomatic powerhouse, the Franks would stop pretending to be a part of the Roman Guild. They started pretending to be the Roman Guild. Now this may sound insane, but this was actually majorly successful. This imposter tradition, started by the Franks, would be a defining trait for the German Guild for a millennia. So the Frankish stats are frankly insane. Impressive diplomacy with many willing and unwilling subjects and allies, a strong military crushing the heretics, a stable empire due to early feudalism, although they lose a couple of points for their system of choosing a new leader, but I will explain this soon. Their defining trait, however, is their administrative skills, which completely revolutionized the European guild building meta. Through the Carolingian Renaissance, the Frankish Guild was also amazing at improving education and the economy. All in all, the Frankish Guild was uncontested during its place in the meta, and it easily reaches a spot at S tier, absolutely rewriting the European meta. But the Franks had one major setback, like mentioned before. They would split up upon the election of a new leader. This was probably implemented by the developers to rebalance Europe's metagame. After the death of another guild leader, the Frankish Guild would splinter in three, after which two of the new Frankish guilds would move away from the German playstyles. But East Francia is who we have to watch as the new leading German guild. They would lean even harder into the imposter trait, becoming known as the Holy Roman Guild. Now you may become tired of me saying this, but this German playstyle would become a staple of the new meta. But for most of their time, they can barely be seen as a unified guild, as their defining trait would be their decentralized nature. So let's instead discuss three of the most impressive builds from within the Holy Roman Empire. The first standout guild was the Hanseatic build. They are one of the most unique builds of the medieval meta. They completely focused on making members of their guild wealthy, foregoing the dynastic conflict common in the era. But don't let that fool you. On the seas, they were a major threat, and money can be exchanged for mercenaries to fight your enemies for you. Their biggest issue, however, is that the Hanseatics were simply a collection of willing cities, meaning when times were good, they were very good. But when times are bad, the entire guild can collapse. All in all, a very good and unique playstyle, which easily lands the Hanseatics a place in A tier. The next top Germanic build was the Austrian or Habsburg build, who would often dominate the larger Holy Roman Guild. They completely maxed out their diplomacy stat, playing the dynastic game. Mostly by just marrying the right people, the Habsburgs united a significant portion of Europe under their control, and while their empire would be divided into two later, the twin Habsburg guilds in Spain and Austria would continue to dominate Europe patch after patch, with especially the Austrian one remaining one of Europe's top meta threats all the way up to the soft reboot of the Versailles patch, since by that point the Habsburg playstyle was just getting stale. Still, while impressive, the Austrian build had some drawbacks. Their military was pretty average, and they had low stability due to a lot of different nationalities existing within the guild. Their administration also suffered from chronic decentralization, and they didn't really innovate much in terms of technology, while their economy wasn't much more than okay, and even became relatively bad in the later patches. But despite all of this, their diplomatic greatness and their longevity as a guild cannot be denied, so the Habsburgs too are placed in A tier. But we have one more A tier playstyle developed quite late in the Holy Roman Empire meta, the Prussian Guild. Anyone who has ever had to fight a Prussian player or guild knows that they are not a joke in a fight. The impressive guild leader, Frederick II, would take the relatively small Prussian guild and lead it to be amongst the great European builds of the time, capable of standing up to the real meta threats. How did the Prussian players make this happen? Mainly by building a top-of-the-art army, outclassing guilds far bigger than it, as well as being forerunners in the development of the nation-state, a technique guilds still use to run themselves today. With a decent economy, especially in their later patches, and a seemingly inherent ability to always be on the right side of conflicts, their stats are insane. The only reason the Prussians only reach A tier is because the competition during their time was extremely fierce. But we aren't fully done with the Prussian guild yet. The developers had very likely mistyped a piece of code, which would result in the French temporarily dominating the European metagame in a way not seen since Rome. It would take the developers a whopping 23 patches and hotfix and 7 very clear messages from the other guilds that this was hella unfair before the Vienna patch finally returned everything to normal. But during the chaos, the old Holy Roman Guild was now gone, leaving room for the Prussian Guild to flex their muscle. Another legendary player would take control over Prussia and in a series of successive patches reunified most German guilds under one banner. Now this completely broke the European metagame, which was quite balanced before. Bismarck would attempt to remain quiet about how extremely broken the German guild was, but his successor, who came to define the guild, didn't. So, patch after patch, calls to nerf the German guild grew louder and louder, until eventually a PvP session occurred on such a scale that hadn't been seen ever before in the history of the game. But despite the German guild being outmatched in seemingly every way by their competitors, they somehow started winning. So the American players had to intervene and a nerf was finally implemented. So once again, we have a German build that completely shook the European meta to its core, building off of the Prussian build. An insane military, great states building, great technological advances, and an industry that even eclipsed Britain. The only weak spot that this German build had was their own arrogance, having a low diplomacy score. But still, these scores easily land the German guild in S tier. But the nerf that Germany experienced in the Versailles patch did little to slow them down. Sure, for a couple of patches, the Weimar guild struggled to keep up due to arbitrary game rules installed by the developers, but when a new leader, who is now banned and I cannot even mention, took over the nation, it was, somehow, once again returned to the fear of every European player. They eliminated pretty much every other European guild with their blitzkrieg ability in such a way that it almost seemed like they were going to get the entire European server deleted. It would once again take American players' intervention to restore balance to the European metagame. Despite them only dominating the meta for a couple of patches, their impact was huge. Another German build with a military stat through the roof, solid state building, and impressive research and economy. This new Germany even managed to have a decent diplomacy, reaching a great average stat, and solidifying their place as another German guild that dominated the European meta in S tier. Now, as you might imagine, following this attempt to break the meta by Germany, the devs struggled with how to rebalance them this time. But they somewhat managed to do it. While the new Germany was being playtested, it was split in two. The West would become the dominant new guild, exploring a new playstyle, and eventually reintegrating the East once the developers could be sure that this new Germany was not going to be an issue again. This new Germany was totally different to anything that came before. Focused on the European Union, they were now the diplomatic powerhouse of the metagame. An impressive state, helping and protecting its people, while still having world-leading industries and innovations. The only thing that this new Germany is lacking, and that's probably for the better, is a capable army. While in terms of the larger game, Germany may not be able to compete with the current American or China guilds, in the European context they are by far the strongest build right now. So I will place them in a special S- tier, as I couldn't decide between S or A. With this, we have explored almost 1800 patches of the game, and apart from a couple of minor periods, you will always be able to find at least one very good German build. The German players have somehow always managed to adapt to their situation and become meta-defining threats in the European server. Very impressive. And this tier list, showing the lowest build explored only at B tier, should reflect the impressive flexibility of the German guild. Hats off to them. But that's where I'll end this video. Thank you all for watching, consider leaving a like and a comment to support the content, and subscribe for 2 more videos every single week. To continue watching, click on one of the 2 videos on screen now. Again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.